All right, my spookies. Welcome back to the best of 2025, where we crack open the vaults and replay the episodes that hit the hardest, the ones that made you pause the show to listen for footsteps in your own house. Tonight's compilation is pure winter nightmare fuel, the kind of cold that doesn't just numb your fingers, it rewrites you. Snow so thick it erases the road behind you. A blizzard that turns a bright, cheerful department store into a locked, shadowy maze. And a tree line where something tall is watching. Something patient enough to wait for you to look away. And then the terrifying and true story of the Wendigo of Algonquin myth. Plenty to whet your appetite. So get comfortable, get warm, and keep one eye on the window, just in case. Because these stories don't just take place in the snow, they thrive in it. Now let's begin our best of 2025, winter horror stories, cryptids, and Wendigo folklore, and see what follows us out of the storm. And make sure you're subscribed for more scary stories, true crime, and so much more every single week. I Love the Cold by Jonathan Lumpkin. It could be worse, the old woman said. I love the cold. Jared Stiles couldn't see how that was possible. I hope so, he said. You're 100 pounds and didn't bring a jacket. Jared wanted to add that this might have been the first time Ms. Durek had been out of Florida for 60 years, but he was trying to hide his rising panic. The car could start, but it wasn't going anywhere. He felt the impact when the car hit something as it slid down the embankment, and maybe it was hard enough to explain the shattered axle, but he didn't understand how his car got off the road. There was a loud whoosh of wind. He felt the car dip slightly away from the wind, and the wheels slid a little towards the battered old guardrail. Then he felt a hard lurch towards the edge. Jared was in his mid-30s, insurance adjuster by day, and giving strangers rides in his car in his spare time. There hadn't been another car on this road for 15 minutes, and the only way to explain the lurch is if another vehicle hit him, and all he had seen was an owl. It was sarcasm, said the old woman from inside the car. And I did bring a jacket. It just isn't thick enough. Jared had worn shirts thicker than what she was calling a jacket, and the snow had started up again. He was looking at his now useless rear passenger tire, remembering the impact. He remembered approaching a curve and heard wind so loud it drowned out nearly every noise in the car, including Ms. Durek's screaming as they knocked over the guardrail and started sliding down the embankment. The ice on the road wasn't out of the ordinary, but how easily the guardrail failed was concerning. It was difficult to see through the snow, but 100 feet up, it didn't look like the wreck of twisted steel that he saw in cell phone pictures every day in the office. It looked more like when he tried to use a coat hanger as a makeshift door lock when he was a kid and bent it in one spot. The passenger side of the car also didn't look like it smashed through metal engineered to stop it. It looked like it knocked something out of the way. It hit the tree on that side, which broke the rear wheel, but that was a singular vertical impact. There's normally more horizontal indentation and linear scratching when vehicles hit guardrails. The only time a vehicle's crumple zones shouldn't crumple is when they hit something significantly more crumply than they are. He didn't have a flashlight, and the only light he had was on the front of the car. But Jared was fairly sure there should be more damage. "My phone doesn't work!" Ms. Durek screamed as she hit her phone against his dashboard. Jared checked his smartwatch. Dead. He pulled out his phone. Dead. The car was still running, which was good, because his headlights were the only thing cutting through the darkness. "I've got charging cables in the console," he said, keeping his voice very calm. "Try plugging it in." Her flight from Jacksonville had landed very late, and she said that she did not trust her sister or brother-in-law behind the wheel. So, she found Jared on a rideshare group on Facebook. Booking clients and not giving a cut to Uber was pretty good when you could get the work. "It's not working," she said, opening the car door to talk to him. "How long before Uber sends someone to check on us?" "They won't," said Jared. "I didn't think you'd want me wasting time picking up other people, so I'm not logged onto the app. Your sister will probably call someone when we don't show up, though." She was quiet for a moment, which was the first time she had stopped talking since he picked her up from the airport. "They gave me their door code," she said softly. "They don't get in until tomorrow afternoon." Ms. Durek closed the door, leaving Jared to his thoughts in a snowstorm. When he was stressed, he would flip the lid of his earbud case up and down. He didn't think a grown man should have a fidget toy, but sometimes he needed one, and it helped him think. Jared tried to steer his thoughts to something other than 2 dead phones, a dead watch, and a dead earbud case. In the 40 minutes since Jared met Ms. Durek, he learned a few things. She was divorced, she wasn't any younger in spirit than she looked, and her favorite hobby was complaining. She complained about a vampire podcast. The podcast's host spent a whole episode trying to say that vampires drinking their victims' blood was missing the point. What mattered was that the victims bled to death, and Ms. Durek thought it was stupid and spent most of the car ride to this point saying so. He wished complaining could be his job, and she had to figure out a way for them to survive until morning. Guys don't stand in the cold very long before they start thinking about making a fire. The tree they hit sliding down was long dead, which had conveniently shattered when it fell over. Dead standing trees are about the best firewood you'll find, almost as good for fires as a lighter. But Jared didn't smoke. He got back into the driver's seat. Ms. Durek was having trouble opening a pill bottle. The car's heater was still working, although hot had been downgraded to warm. Jared suspected arthritis, and he held out his hand. She gave it to him, and he opened the bottle and handed it back. The old woman looked at him, not to see if he was going to steal her pills, but if he was going to judge her for needing them. Jared knew the look. "My mom has bipolar," he said to the front windshield. "She also takes pills that have Lith something printed on them, and she has fewer bad days. Feeling some sad coming up?" "Not this time," she said, swallowing one of the pills. "But too much happy isn't going to help right now." "What kind of happy?" Jared felt the desperate procrastination rise between him and outside as he asked the question. Small talk in a warm car is infinitely better than a snowstorm that will kill them with no help. "Cozy happy? Funny joke happy? Accomplishment happy?" He trailed off. "Nostalgic happy," she said. Something about the way she answered made Jared think she had not been asked that question before. Specifically about dancing underdressed in the snow. Aren't you from Florida? It didn't happen, it just feels nostalgic. She paused for a second. I'd kill for some cozy happy right now. Your mom teach you about the happies? Jared glanced at her and looked back out the windshield. Some. She tried to keep me at a distance from her mental health, but she opened up when I got older. I can't remember her mentioning nostalgic happy, though. It's new for me, too, she said. After a minute of trying the dead radio, Jared spoke again. Besides the car itself, everything that uses a battery is dead. The heater might go pretty soon, too. I think there's a blanket in the trunk, but I'd like to get a fire going if I can. Do you have a lighter? I don't. I have hand sanitizer, which is flammable, if that helps. She pulled a small plastic squeeze bottle out of her purse and handed it to him. You could try jumper cables, but I doubt you'd get anything going in all this. Why is all our stuff dead? Jared thought for a moment. The only thing that makes sense is something killed them, but wasn't strong enough to take out something as big as the car. Has to be something electromagnetic, but that's a problem I can't really worry about until I get a fire going. There had been folk tales in the area throughout the years of disappearances and dead batteries in the area. They went back to early settlers and demagnetized compasses, but conspiracy theories and ghost stories weren't going to get anyone home safe. I was kidding about the jumper cables. It won't work, and I don't want you to freeze to death or electrocute yourself trying. She was wrong, and Jared was drunk with accomplishment happy, and I told you so happy, which he thought were the best kinds. It had taken a while and a lot of sticks, but he eventually managed to get a fire going. The trick is to put your larger logs at the bottom and get a bunch of sticks burned down to coals on top. Keep putting sticks on, and the coals will light the wood. There was enough shattered tree that it should go for a few hours. The snow sizzled against his fire, and it was bright enough that he could see further into the darkness around him. He thought he saw a young woman until he blinked, and she was gone. She was dressed exactly like the missing person Facebook post from a week before. A lawyer had driven home from a late night at the office. Her vehicle was in her driveway, with her phone and bag still in the passenger seat and the driver's door open. But she never made it to the Ring doorbell. Snow had covered up the footprints. The phone had been factory reset, and the cops had nothing to go on. For a brief second, he thought he saw her, except that her hair and face were different. Maybe his mind brought up the missing person photo with the clothes she was wearing at the game. All that was there now was an owl staring at him from a tree. "That's amazing," said a voice beside him. Jared jumped sideways. When he looked back, there was a tiny 100-pound-old woman laughing at him. She pulled his blanket over her head, shook it with her arms, and made ghost noises at him. "The woods are haunted, Uber driver. Beware!" She trailed off. "Oh shit," Ms. Durrick said. "You're bleeding." Jared looked down where he had landed. There was a rock about where his forehead hit the ground, with blood on it. He knew head injuries bled a lot, and he could see it start to drip off his eyebrow. He felt the spot on his forehead, where it hurt a little, but he wasn't going to die of blood loss. "I'm fine," he said as he got up. My fault for being so jumpy. Get warm by the fire. I've got a first aid kit in the trunk." He got to the open hood of the car and felt briefly like passing out. He heard the sound of a car approaching and saw the shadows from headlights on the road 20 feet up. The loud wind came again and drowned out his yells for help. As he looked up, he stopped yelling. When the car's headlights hit the guardrail, he could clearly see that it had been repaired. He had hoped the driver would see the guardrail that he had crashed into, but it appeared to have been bent back to where it was before the crash. The driver would have no reason to check on them or call 911. Jared turned around, and that's when he saw her. She was beautiful, appeared to be in her late 20s, dressed exactly like the missing lawyer. This woman was taller, and her shirt didn't quite reach her hip. Her complexion was fairer, darker hair, and was clearly an athlete. She had her hand on Ms. Durick's cheek, and it was the most relaxed her body language had been since Jared met her, even letting the blanket slip from her shoulders and fall to the ground. "You are tired, old woman. Kick snow on the fire, and then we can rest. We don't need it anymore." Her voice was sweet, as if Ms. Durick was a loved one she hadn't seen in a long time. Jared heard an accent, but couldn't identify it. Ms. Durick leaned her head into the hand on her cheek and made a soft noise Jared couldn't interpret, other than sounding happy. The woman met Jared's eyes, and he felt as if his head was a train that had been knocked from its track. He immediately felt the sensation of his knees being cold, and when he looked down, he was kneeling in the snow. His brain felt broken, as if he was playing a video game that lagged. By the time he looked up again, he felt his face gently pressed into the woman's stomach as she ran a hand through his hair. She shushed him, brought her index finger to her lips, and kissed it before touching the corner of his mouth. It was the last real thing he felt as he drowned in the happiness of being loved. He opened his eyes. Jared thought he had woken up from a nightmare he couldn't remember. He was laying in a pond looking up into a snowstorm. There was an owl curled up on his chest, and he had no other motivation in the world than to keep this creature warm. He knew it was the last of its kind, her family hunted to extinction by the bats of Europe. This owl could not make more like it because there was too much risk to be discovered. All around the shore of the pond were people, dancing, naked in the snow. He turned his head to the side and saw the water at the shore start to freeze and the ice coming closer. One of the dancers was the lawyer he recognized from the missing person flyer. She had recently broken up with her boyfriend after he cheated on her and had been planning to move closer to her parents. Jared knew that she was his sister now in a family brought together by this owl. There was an explorer who killed his family after getting drunk 300 years ago. He lit his covered wagon on fire and used the heat to keep warm. He was now a brother in the owl's family. Jared could see the ice forming closer to him. It would touch him soon, but the cold would not get this owl. Something like a purr came from the bird on his chest, and it was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. He reached out to his right and tried to touch the ice, to keep it from getting closer. Ms. Durrick's head exploded in pain. There was also a familiar sensation as the lithium kicked in. It felt as if the wires in her head were being torn out of something happy and violently reconnected where they were supposed to go. She looked down at a half-smothered fire and snow on her feet. She looked up and saw her driver kneeling at the feet of a woman and hugging her tightly. As her brain rewired itself, primitive fear took over. She could see Jared's arms around this woman and the way her brain reacted. She would have been less scared if the woman was a large bear. Jared's fingertips were starting to turn black, and she watched the gangrene begin to reach the knuckles of his right hand. The woman was whispering to him about getting warm and resting. Ms. Durrick felt herself about to pass out. She stepped forward, picked up the only weapon available to her, and did the only thing she could think of that might make a difference. She jammed the end of the jumper cables into the sides of the other woman's head. The headlights dimmed, and the engine sounded as if it was going to die. The woman didn't stiffen up or jump away like she expected her to. As soon as the electricity sparked into her skull, the woman slumped and fell to the ground like a building collapsing. Her veins and arteries bulged against her skin. The skin above her veins charred and cracked before opening, and a green fire poured out. Her driver's body was as still as a statue. Tears mixed with the blood from his head in a bright red streak down the side of his nose to his chin, forming a crimson icicle. The wound had not scabbed over, but it wasn't bleeding anymore. His arms were still hugging someone that wasn't there. She tried to lift him to his feet, but he was so stiff that his knee came off the ground. She was crying now, knowing she was never getting rescued. All that was left of the woman was a burning pile of clothes and wispy green fire. It reminded her of the northern lights, and the heat was intermittently and sporadically hot, but didn't seem to correspond to the dancing fire. There was a sweetness to the smell of the smoke that she could not identify. Ms. Durrick looked from the dying fire to her frozen driver and knew she would join them soon. It was only getting colder. Her legs couldn't handle the cold, and adrenaline and her mind couldn't handle the death. She sat down with her back against the front of the car. The heat from the engine was nice. Panic was setting in, and the woman's green, burning eyes kept intruding into her vision. The weight of knowing she wasn't going to survive the cold went straight to her stomach, and she vomited. She heard what she thought was a bell and looked to the statue of her driver. There was a tiny glow coming from his wrist, and when she looked at it, she saw a new user welcome message on his smartwatch. The Blizzard of 58 by Bruce Haney. Every kid loves a snow day, and Margaret was no exception. But why did it have to be this day of all days? She was upset because her big brother, who annoyingly calls her Margot, was supposed to take her to Meyer and Frank's department store because Lenore Shelley Ghoulcraft was putting on an in-store appearance. Margaret knew that if school got canceled, there was a good chance that the appearance would get canceled as well. Lenore Shelley Ghoulcraft hosted a television show called Miss Ghoul's Hour of Madness on KPWN. The show had only been running for around 3 months, but Margaret had been hooked since the first episode in October of '57. She was impressed by the ad in the paper that had lines like, "We dare you to watch," and "Too scary for the weak-hearted." The first episode was 1951's The Thing from Another World. Margaret loved the show, and her big brother liked it as well. This was a big deal to her because she and her brother used to be close, but he just turned 14 and she was only 12. Not a huge gap, but he was at that age where he was less interested in hanging out with his kid sister and much more interested in impressing the older kids and talking to girls his own age who weren't related to him. Margaret wondered if maybe her brother just liked Miss Ghoul's Hour of Madness because of how beautiful Lenore was. Because she was. Margaret understood that. But she loved her for her humor and for how cool she was. In one episode, Lenore Shelley Ghoulcraft, or as her fans called her, Miss Ghoul, rallied against the local school board for not teaching kids the important parts of history. Kids today don't even learn about werewolves, vampires, or even ghouls like me anymore. Miss Ghoul had rallied. Parents and teachers were not impressed by this, which just made the kids love her that much more. Much to Margaret's dismay, school did indeed get canceled that day. The snow was light, but there was the threat of an even bigger storm, possibly even a blizzard, coming later in the day. But the weather stayed mild, so Margaret started working on her parents to convince them to let her brother David take her to the event anyways. "I've been checking the TV all day, and they haven't said anything about the event being canceled." Margaret's pleas worked, and she got her parents to agree that if it didn't start snowing again by 4 p.m, they could go. The event started at 5 o'clock, but it was only a 20-minute bus ride to the department store where she was having the appearance. So, Margaret agreed to the terms. It didn't snow before they left, but it did start 15 minutes into their bus ride. And by the time they were dropped off in front of the 5-story department store, there was an additional 3 inches of snow on the ground. They arrived after 4:30. David wanted to look at the electronics section first. He heard they had a portable 9-inch television. "I know I can't afford it, but wouldn't it be swell? Your own TV. One you could watch even if our parents are hogging the one in the living room. The cool thing, too, is it weighs less than 20 pounds and has a handle. That makes it portable," David told his little sister. Margaret wasn't having it. "No way! I want a good spot to see Miss Ghoul." She also wanted to get there to make sure it was still happening. When they arrived at the space, there were 30 chairs set up facing the minimal set. No one was sitting in any of them. The stage featured a coffin and a wreath with a sash that said, "Beloved, R.I.P." Just as they got to the front and sat down, a man walked over to the wreath and hung up a handwritten sign with the words, "Event canceled, storm warning," on it. Then, over the PA system, a similar message went out. "Good evening, shoppers. With the impending snowstorm, the The in-store appearance of Miss Ghoulcraft is canceled. As well, to be cautious, we are closing the store for the evening. Please bring your final purchases to our always happy, always helpful cashiers. Please do hurry, as we want them to get home to their families safely." "But we were so close to meeting her," Margaret pleaded with her brother. "I'm sure they'll reschedule the event. Come on, let's get home while we still can." "Let's look for her. She's probably still here if it just got canceled. We could still meet her," Margaret argued. David wanted to respond and tell her no, but she was already up and moving. Most of the staff were heading towards the exits, so the usually off-limits areas were unguarded. David watched and then followed her. Outside the large windows, David saw that the snow was falling at such a rate he couldn't even see the building next door. It was a total whiteout. "Margot, the snow is really coming down!" She didn't listen, so David had to speed up his pace to follow her into the dimly lit hallway she had entered. "Okay, Margot, we gotta go while we still can," David said. But just then, Margaret saw a simple sign tacked to the wall that said, "Guest," with an arrow pointed further down the dark hallway. She pointed it out to David. "We are so close!" David got caught up in the moment because he too wanted to meet Lenore Ghoulcraft. He wanted to know if she was even prettier in person than she was on black and white television. They followed that sign to a long walkway that led to another hallway. "Who knew there were all these offices behind stores?" Margaret asked. "They have to count the beans somewhere." "The beans?" Margaret asked. David didn't answer, and Margaret had lost interest in the answer anyway, because she realized she was standing right in front of the guest door. Margaret knocked, but got no response. So she pushed the door open. Inside, there were red roses with a card next to them, and a small basket of untouched fruit. What wasn't there was any sign of Lenore Ghoulcraft. The handwritten sign on the door said, "Sandra Warden, parenthesis, Lenore S. Ghoulcraft." "She must have got caught in the snow and never made it here," David explained to his sister. Margaret looked up at him. He could see the disappointment all over her face. "Margot, it's fine. I'll take you to the next appearance. Now let's get out of here while we can still get home. And remember, it's Wednesday. We can watch her show tonight," David said, to try to comfort her. "What if she's still stuck in the snow and doesn't make it to her show?" Margaret asked. "Don't worry, there'll be a new episode. They film those things days, if not weeks, before they air," David explained. That made Margaret feel better. That is, until they heard an explosion in the distance. And then the lights went out. They both screamed. Then, a few moments later, they heard what they thought was someone else screaming. It wasn't close, and it was hard to tell where it came from, being that they were in the back room of a 5-story building. "I'm scared," Margaret said. "It's okay, it was probably just a transformer. The lights went out, right?" David explained. "What about the scream?" "Well, we screamed when the lights went out. Maybe it was the same thing with whoever that was." "Maybe," Margaret said. "Either way, let's start making our way out of here. It's going to be hard in the dark." They struggled because where they were, there were no windows, so it was pitch black. Margaret held out her brother's hand as he led the way. They walked for a few minutes before realizing they may have just went in circles. After a couple more minutes, Margaret thought she was hearing noises. but she couldn't figure out what or where they were coming from. "Do you hear that?" "I don't hear anything," David said. "Okay, maybe my mind is just playing tricks on me." "It could be rats," David offered. The thought made Margaret let go of her brother's hand so that she could use both of hers to feel the walls as she desperately tried to find a way out. "Hold up!" David yelled out because she was getting too far ahead of him. But then he heard a click and some light entered the hallway. Margaret had found the exit. Back in the shopping area, they could see a lot better. There were no electric lights, but there was light filling in from the various windows. It was night, but the moon's reflection hitting the white snow that was coming down kept it from being fully dark. This was the moment they realized that there wasn't anyone else in the store. Noticing this, they ran back down the now frozen-in-place escalators and then ran to the entrance, which was, of course, locked. It didn't take David long to find that you didn't need a key to unlock it from the inside. The only problem was that the doors opened outward, and there were already a couple of feet of snow piled up against them. They both pushed on the doors as hard as they could, but they wouldn't budge. "David, what are we going to do? How are we going to get the doors open?" Margaret asked her big brother. "Margot, maybe it's for the best. I don't think we want to go out there. Look at all that snow. And I don't see anybody. If we go out there, we'll freeze to death." "But I'm already cold," Margaret said. David wasn't quite sure what to do to fix their situation, but he knew he could at least try to solve the problem of his little sister being cold. Of course, this would benefit him too. He was starting to feel the chill as well. The two of them made their way to the home goods section. David found a stack of blankets and covered his sister up. "The smaller the space to heat up, the better we will be at keeping warm. I learned that in Scouts, so stay under the covers until I get back. I'm going to try and find us a tent." With that, he was gone looking for supplies, and Margaret was left alone. She hoped her brother wasn't gone too long. She was still worried about the sounds she had heard earlier. This worry increased when she began hearing the strange sounds again. It didn't sound like rats to her. It wasn't scratching. More like a light tapping. When she realized that the sound was getting closer, she finally figured out what it was. It was footsteps coming from the opposite direction of where her brother had gone. They weren't alone. With her curiosity piqued, she stared in the direction of the approaching figure. The first indication that this person was female was when she saw a leg wearing a black pump come around the corner. Margaret held her breath and remained silent as she waited to see the rest of the body reveal itself. Then, to her amazement and excitement, it turned out to be Lenore Shelley Ghoulcraft in her signature black dress and pumps. "Miss Ghoul!" Margaret yelled. Miss Ghoul just looked towards her with no expression. "I'm your biggest fan," Margaret continued. "Oh, thank you, my dear fiend. Now tell me, what are you doing here all alone in this storm? Shouldn't you be at home in your pajamas with a bowl of popcorn waiting for my show to come on? Tonight, we're playing a personal favorite of mine, The Mad Ghoul from 1943. It's the story of my older brother, Miss Ghoul said, and then laughed. This made Margaret give a little chuckle. In the voice of the Wicked Witch, she asked, "Are you all alone, my pretty? Or is your little dog here, too?" Margaret laughed again, but didn't answer. "Are you all alone?" Miss Ghoul asked in her normal voice. "My brother's here. He's trying to find us some supplies to stay warm." Ah, what a good, protective brother. David was searching in the sporting goods department for a tent, but was having no luck. He figured that the small sporting goods section didn't bother carrying tents in the middle of winter. But by this time, he had already found a large bag that he was filling with items that he believed would help them. He told himself that it was not stealing, because none of the stuff he was taking was going to leave the building. Being that there were no tents, he needed to find another small space where they could trap their body heat so that they didn't freeze during the night. On the 4th floor, he thought of the perfect spot when he saw the female apparel section. The dressing room. He was nervous as he approached it because it was much darker there, as it was located in the center of that floor, so the light from the windows didn't quite make it. David reached into the bag and pulled out the flashlight he borrowed from the sporting goods section. When he pointed his light into the store, he noticed that a coat rack was lying on the ground, like there had been some kind of struggle. He approached slowly and searched the space with the beam of his flashlight for anything else to be off. "What is that?" David said. He knew what it was, but hoped that he was wrong. He continued moving forward, now at an even slower pace. "Oh, fudge," he whispered to himself as he continued towards the pool of blood he saw on the floor. Fudge, fudge, fudge! He wanted to scream when he saw the dead body of what he thought was a man who looked like he had been attacked by a wild animal, with his neck torn open and his intestines laying next to him, plus the rather large chunk out of his skull. It was hard to determine what was the wound that killed him. The only reason he didn't scream was that he was worried that whatever did this was still in the building. He turned around and ran. He had to get back to his sister before whatever did this got to her. "The doors are stuck. We can't get out," Margaret explained to Miss Ghoul. "Oh, well, what are we to do?" Miss Ghoul said. "Aren't you freezing in just that dress?" "Oh, yes, it is quite cold, but I hide it well. I'm just that good of an actress." "But your skin looks so smooth, no goosebumps or anything. It's freezing in here." "It's amazing what modern makeup can hide," Miss Ghoul laughed. "I guess so," Margaret said. "Margot! Margot!" David yelled as he ran to where he had left his sister. But when he spotted Miss Ghoul standing there, he stopped in his tracks. "What, David?" Margaret asked. But he paid no attention. His panic was temporarily forgotten as he looked upon Miss Ghoul, and she smiled at him. It's Lenore Ghoulcraft, in the undead flesh. A pleasure to make your acquaintance, young man," she said. Then she switched from a friendly smile to a seductive one. The teenage boy's hormones were activated, and he completely forgot about his panic from the horrors he had just seen. "Gee whiz, you are even prettier in person." "Oh, am I? You flirt," she said, and then threw her head back in a seductive laugh that grew in intensity until it transformed into something else, something manic. When she put her head back down to look at the boy, she smiled and opened her mouth to reveal her teeth. David smiled back because he didn't know what else to do. The laughter scared Margaret, so she pulled the blankets over her head. Since she was hiding, she didn't see Miss Ghoul stick out her alarmingly long tongue. David looked at her in shock as she smiled with her large, serpent-like tongue sticking out. He then watched in horror as she curved the tip of her tongue back towards her mouth, where she used it to remove her fake front teeth. This revealed her real teeth, which were sharp and looked like they were made for chewing through bone. Because she was hiding, Margaret didn't see what happened when Miss Ghoul attacked her brother. All she heard was his scream, and by the time she got the nerve to climb out from her blankets, they were both gone. And there was a pool of blood where her brother had been standing. Margaret knew she had to hide, but where? Plus, she was too cold to get out from under the blankets. She looked all around at what her options were. None looked great. But then she noticed that duffel bag that David had brought back with supplies was left behind. She didn't get out from under her blankets. She simply scooted herself forward, pulling the blankets with her. When she got close enough, she grabbed the handle of the bag and dragged it towards herself. She unzipped it in a hurry, worried that Miss Ghoul would come back. She started to look inside, but she stopped and listened when she thought she heard something. After waiting 10 seconds, she chalked it up to her nerves and began searching through the bag once again. When she heard footsteps running towards her, she took one look behind her, hoping it was her brother. It wasn't. It was Lenore Shelley Ghoulcraft. She had abandoned her heels and was running right towards her. With her sharp teeth and the blood that was dripping from her mouth, down her chin and onto her dress. Margaret no longer saw her as the hero to look up to. She didn't even see her as a person, more like a creature, like an actual ghoul. Margaret dug through the bag frantically, looking for something to fight her off with, but found nothing. Before Miss Ghoul got to her, she burst out of the blankets with the bag in hand and ran as fast as she could. She was afraid to look back to see how close Miss Ghoul was, so she didn't. She wasn't sure how close Miss Ghoul was as she sprinted from the home goods section and navigated through the kitchen area. If she wasn't in such a panic, she might have thought about grabbing a knife on her way through. But she was so lost in terror that she almost ran straight into a floor display of pots and pans. As she exited the kitchen department, she heard a loud bang and then things falling to the ground. Miss Ghoul must not have made it past the pots and pans display like she had. If she had seen that in a cartoon, Margaret would have been laughing. But in real life, she knew it would just make Miss Ghoul angry and more determined. She did hope that it would buy her a little time at least. So, when she reached the juniors' clothing department, she decided to hide behind the Sunday dresses that hung against the wall. Margaret sat and tried to catch her breath while listening for any sign of Miss Gould. When she was calm enough to remember how cold she was, she dug through the duffel bag again. Lucky for her, her brother had found a warmer coat than the one she had on, a hat, and even a better pair of gloves. The coat was the kind she saw rich kids wear, while the hat was even fancier than that. It was made of fur. It was the kind of hat she only saw people wear in movies. She put it on, and then put the jacket on over her other coat. Though she was still frightened, this bit of comfort and warmth made her smile. However, she only got to enjoy it for a moment. She forgot all about her comfort when she heard footsteps approaching her hiding spot. She put her hands together like she did before she went to bed each night and prayed. She hoped God could still hear her, even though she was not saying her prayer out loud like she normally would. Dear God, please let that be my brother. Please let him be alive. Even though he is annoying, I love him. Also, God, please don't let me get eaten by Miss Gould. Amen. But she accidentally said the Amen part out loud. When two hands reached into the dresses to pull them apart, revealing her hiding spot, she screamed. When David heard his sister scream, he knew he had to get out of his hiding spot. It was a good one, too. He found one of the new models of refrigerators, the ones that don't lock from the outside. He knew how to check for the inside latch because it was all over the news 2 years previously when the Refrigerator Safety Act was put into place after several kids locked themselves in discarded fridges while playing hide and seek. Those kids always won the game, but when they were finally found, they couldn't celebrate their victory. As he made his way towards the scream through the kitchen department, he grabbed a knife. He wished he had the duffel bag. In there, he had something he really thought would help them fight her off. He had grabbed it and put it in the bag after he had found that first dead body. Miss Gould picked up young Margaret with one hand, held her above her head, and laughed. Oh, you sweet thing, I will so enjoy eating you, she said, exposing her large teeth again. With ungodly strength, she moved Margaret closer to her mouth, which unhinged and opened wider and wider until her mouth was large enough to take Margaret's whole head in. Hey! Barf breath! David yelled while running at her with a knife held in front of him. Miss Gould looked over at him, then threw Margaret at David. His reaction time wasn't quick enough to move the knife, and his sister landed on it, stomach first. Margot! David screamed as they tumbled and rolled onto the floor from the momentum. As the ghoul approached, she pulled the knife out of Margaret and walked over to David. As Miss Gould walked away, Margaret rolled up her coat in a panic to look at her wound. It was minor. If she hadn't been wearing the two coats, she might have been dead. Hey, cutie, I wondered where you'd gotten off to. Did I play too rough last time? She said, then took the knife and pressed it into David's shoulder. It was the same spot where she had bitten a small chunk out of him earlier. The pain was excruciating, but he still had the wherewithal to yell to his sister, Margot! Grab the bag! It's in the bag! Margaret jumped up. She wanted to fight off the ghoul, but she followed her brother's demand and ran to where the bag was hidden. Inside, she pulled out a small camping stove, a small container of kerosene, and another flashlight before she spotted what looked like a gun. But the barrel was too big, she thought. It looked like a shotgun handgun. She searched the bag for bullets, but only found these cylindrical things, which she hoped were them. She slid one in. It fit, then put one more in her pocket. "Here goes nothing," she said, then pointed the thing at Miss Ghoul and pulled the trigger. "You have to cock it!" her brother screamed in agony as Miss Ghoul twisted the blade. "Fudge!" Margaret cocked the gun, pointed it at Miss Ghoul, and pulled the trigger. Out of the barrel, a projectile hit Miss Ghoul on the back and then burst into flames. This made her stop her attack on David as she frantically patted the back of her head, putting out the fire and checking for damage. Once the fire was out, she stood up and walked towards Margaret. "A flare gun? That was your big attempt at stopping me?" Miss Ghoul laughed. Margaret was scared but determined. She waited for the right moment. It came when Miss Ghoul hissed at her. Lucky for Margaret, she opened her mouth wide in the process. That was the moment that Margaret fired the second shot she had loaded. Margaret watched as the flare flew directly into Miss Ghoul's mouth, slid on her tongue, and disappeared down her throat. Miss Ghoul bellowed in agony and scratched at her throat as if she could get to the burning flare that was in her esophagus. Margaret took this opportunity to run to her brother and pull the knife out of his shoulder. She slid it into the front pocket of her jacket so that she could have both hands free to help David up. As soon as he grabbed one of her hands and started running, dragging her behind. He pulled so fast that she almost lost her balance. They ran down multiple frozen escalators before Miss Ghoul once again caught up to them as they ran through the shoe department. Miss Ghoul was furious and began to take large leaps across the floor towards them. They tried knocking over as many shoes as they could to slow her down, but it did very little. Eventually, they found themselves up against the windows leading to the outside. "Where are we going to go?" Margaret asked. "I don't know," David said. "I'm too young to die." David looked around at what was at their disposal to fight the creature off. "Stay here." What? "Do you trust me?" David asked. "Yes." "Okay," David said, then ran, leaving his sister behind as Miss Ghoul approached. When he got far enough away, he yelled, "Hey, you old hag! Come get me!" Miss Ghoul took the bait and ran towards David, who grabbed the big metal shoe-size measurer and then ran towards where the ghoul had been. Then he made his way towards his sister. At this point, he wished they hadn't knocked over all the shoes because it hadn't slowed Miss Ghoul down much, but it was slowing him down significantly. He got just close enough to his sister when Miss Ghoul grabbed the back of his shirt. "Duck!" David yelled, and threw the heavy metal shoe measurer towards his sister. She just barely moved in time as it whizzed past her head and smashed the large glass window behind her. The cold was felt instantly by Margaret and snow began to flow into the department store. "Jump!" David yelled. Margaret looked out the window. They were on the second floor. It was still dumping snow, and she prayed that the snow hadn't frozen over yet. Since it was still coming down, she told herself it must be soft. If it was, it might be survivable. If it's hard, it would be like jumping onto concrete. "Screw it," she said, in an attempt to convince herself. But when she went to jump, she couldn't do it. She was too scared. "Jump!" David yelled as Miss Gould turned him around and opened her mouth wide to bite him. "This bite you won't run away from," Miss Gould said. "Let go of my brother!" Margaret yelled as she ran towards Miss Gould. In her hand was the knife she had pulled from her brother's shoulder earlier. She slashed Miss Gould's face, creating a large gash through her mouth and nose. Blood flowed down from her wound at a rate that alarmed Miss Gould. She dropped David so she would have both hands to inspect her sliced open face. "I guess you have more of a face for radio now," Margaret said. David ran to his sister and hugged her. "You saved my life," he said, and then grabbed her by the hand and ran towards the window. He was leaving this all up to Faith as he leapt out, pulling his sister behind. They both disappeared into the heavy snow that was coming down in sheets, hoping for survival. The sounds they made when they hit the ground made Miss Gould smile. There was a thud. Then they both bellowed in agony. But you can't bellow if you're dead. In the fall, Margot broke her right arm, and David twisted his ankle. They writhed in pain as Miss Gould looked down from the broken window, with her now, thanks to Margaret, much larger smile. They both got quiet when they heard someone slogging through the snow in their direction. "Margaret, is that you? David?" a woman's voice said. "It's them! It's really them!" another voice said. Margaret and David were both relieved to see it was their parents. "How did you get here?" Margaret asked. "Originally in a taxi, but it got stuck, and we walked the rest of the way," Mom said. "We were so afraid you were somewhere freezing to death," their father said. "All right, come on, quick, get up. We have to get you somewhere warm." "I don't think I can walk," David said. "I think my arm is broken," Margaret cried. A sound of laughter came from above. Margaret, David, and their parents looked up, but Miss Gould was gone. "Did you jump out of that window?" "Why?" their father asked. "Let's not worry about that now. We need to get them out of this cold." "Doesn't your aunt live around here?" the father asked. "Oh, yes, she does," the mother said. With that, the father picked up David, and the mother helped Margaret up, and they made their way to their aunt's to warm up and figure out what the next step would be. That night, the last episode of Miss Gould's Hour of Madness aired. However, with all the power outages around town, almost nobody saw it. Weeks later, after what became known as the Blizzard of '58 had come and gone, the family sat watching television. Margaret's arm was still in a cast, but was healing nicely. On the news, they announced that Miss Gould's House of Madness was no more, and that Lenore Shelley Ghoulcraft had not been seen since the snowstorm. "Oh, I'm sorry, dear. Hopefully she's okay," her mother said. Margaret and David shared a glance. "You won't get to meet her now," her mother added. "It's all right, Mama. I don't want to meet her. What if she was awful? It's like people say, never meet your idols." I Was Stalked by a Monster from the Woods by Michael Kelso. I used to love sitting on my front porch, gazing at the mountain full of trees spread out before me. Each season gave me a new appreciation for the beauty of nature. Even winter, which I hate, would color my trees in the most pristine white, making them look like a crowd of bridesmaids dressed in their spotless gowns, waiting for their bride. My favorite season was fall. The explosions of colors laid out like a gigantic quilt that changed from one day to the next until the last leaf floated to the ground and surrendered to winter. I could sit there for hours, watching. Time would slip away as I admired my trees in total contentment. That was before. I haven't looked at my trees in a long time ever since. It was a beautiful spring day. The blossoms on the trees were full of color right before the leaves unfurled their brilliant spring green. There was a stillness in the air. Usually the wind blows nonstop down the mountain to varying degrees of strength, but it's always there. On this day, there wasn't even a puff of a breeze. It felt good, since the temperatures were only in the lower 70s, but something about it seemed off. My trees stood silent, unmoving, as if they had also noticed the stillness and were awaiting some unseen harbinger of ill tidings. As usual, I took solace from such thoughts by admiring my trees. As I panned through the colorful buds about to emerge, I saw something I didn't expect. One of the trees moved. It wasn't much of a movement, just a subtle twitch of a branch. I shrugged it off as a rogue breeze, but it was only in that one spot. None of the trees around it had moved. This drew my attention, and I focused on the offending spot. It was around 50 yards away, just into the tree line near a field. I picked up my binoculars, which are my constant companion when I sit on my porch, to spot various birds and other oddities. I focused on this oddity to see if it was merely my imagination. Zooming in on the offending branch, it seemed to be nothing out of order at first. But as I gave it my full attention, I noticed something odd. There were no buds on the branch. As strange as that was, the next observation I made was the branch was straight as an arrow. Intriguing, but hardly conclusive. But there were several other small branches growing straight up out of it. None of these had any buds either. These facts swirled through my mind, creating half-baked conclusions, when, without warning, the branch moved. I watched with rapt fascination as the branch moved straight up. It wasn't like a breeze had caught it and waved it around as branches are wont to do. It went straight up, staying completely level as it was before. This curiosity captured my total attention as everything around me ceased to exist until I solved the riddle of the moving branch. Fanciful thoughts of Ents sprang from the favorite stories of my youth and well into my adulthood, I smiled at the foolishness of such machinations. I knew my mind was having a bit of fun with me. It was the only conclusion that made any sense. This entire foray had been my mind, playing tricks on me. If only that were the case, I would tell this story with the mirth of an old man spreading flights of fancy. I was about to put down my binoculars and take my mind inside for a nap, where it could venture out into a proper dream, when the branch did the impossible. It moved sideways. It was like I was watching a time-lapse of the branch in its growing cycle, only none of the smaller points on the branch grew. It only got longer. And then I saw it. At the end of the branch, there was a head. I'd seen lots of animals during my time sitting on my porch. Bears, mountain lions, skunks, coyotes. But I'd never seen anything like this. It looked like the bare skull of a deer. There wasn't an ounce of skin on it. It was several sizes bigger than the largest deer skull I had ever seen. It peeked around the corner and its hand grasped the tree. It was skeletal as well. But the worst part was, it was looking right at me, with its empty eye sockets. There weren't any eyes that I could see. My mind didn't give me a minute to ponder if this was a figment of my imagination. I was out of my chair, inside, and locking the door behind me before I knew I'd even gotten up. The last thing I remembered was how high up on the tree the head was. It must have been close to 8 feet tall. I ran through the house, locking all the doors and windows, wondering how much good it would do if that thing decided it wanted in. My closest neighbor was a mile away, and I began wondering if this wouldn't be a good time for a visit. While I stood in the middle of my kitchen, panicked and indecisive, trying to figure out what to do next, I realized, to my horror, that I had left my binoculars on the porch. The thought that this nightmare of a monster would run up and steal my binoculars was totally ludicrous, but if I wanted to check through the window to see if it was still there, they would be quite invaluable. Convincing myself to retrieve them, though, was another matter entirely. I slowly approached the window that looked out onto the front porch, as if it were the monster, waiting to grab me and drag me to its lair. With great trepidation and using more than my fair share of courage, I stepped to the window and peeked out through the curtain. My initial reaction was pure joy as I no longer saw the monster in the tree line. I began chuckling to myself for the prank my mind had played on me and making all sorts of excuses for what the apparition was. The smile fell from my face when I saw it standing in the middle of the field. Not only was it far beyond the horror my imagination had presented, but it was a good 20 yards closer to my house. The nightmare stood easily 8 feet tall and had a massive rack of horns that went straight out in either direction, at least 3 feet. What I could see of it was skeletal. There was no skin at all, except for the cloak that was draped over its shoulders and fell to mid-calf. The cloak looked rough, like it had been made from the skins of other animals. Those unholy, empty eye sockets were staring straight at me. I froze as terror gripped me and managed to squeeze every ounce of fluid out of my bladder. It took a step towards me, then another. I knew there was no way I'd make it across the driveway to my car before it caught me and tore me to pieces. My mind started throwing out anything and everything it could. Call someone was the most plausible. I pulled out my phone from my pocket and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? Came the wonderful sound of rescue. I'm being stalked by something, I said. Do you mean someone? No, it's definitely something. Okay, describe this something for me. I gave the best description I could of the monster, not daring to look out the window for confirmation of my details. Uh-huh, the operator said. Well, give me your address and I'll send over a cryptid hunter as soon as possible. Oh, okay. My address is... The line disconnected. Hello? I said desperately. I tried calling back, but it just kept ringing. Hiding didn't seem to be an option. It was obvious from the animal skins it wore that this thing was a very proficient hunter. I assumed that meant it had a good sense of smell and would be able to sniff me out of any hiding place in my home. My next option was to leave. I went to the kitchen and grabbed my car keys, hoping to slip out, unnoticed. Those hopes were dashed when I looked out and saw the monster walking up my driveway. I ducked behind the door, eyes darting around, looking for anywhere to hide. To this day, I don't know why, but I ran to the drawers and grabbed a butcher knife. What good it was going to do against a monster that was entirely bones was beyond me, but I wasn't exactly calmly considering my options at that moment. The first crash splintered my outside door. The second crash destroyed it. The monster ducked its head and stepped inside my mudroom, staring right at me. I had 3 options: run to the living room, go upstairs, or down to the basement. I have no idea why I sprinted toward the basement door. I shut and locked it behind me as the inside door broke into pieces, making my way down the steps as quickly and quietly as possible. I listened to the floorboards creak above me. Looking around the semi-finished basement, with just enough room to stand if I ducked my head, I quickly discovered that there was no clear-cut hiding places. The footsteps above slowly made their way back to the living room, then up the stairs. For a brief, fleeting moment, I thought about going back up to the kitchen when the basement door flung open. The steps groaned under the weight of the monster, and I was overwhelmed by the stench of death. I ran back to the short hallway toward the outside cellar door, but I knew it was too heavy for me to open it from the inside. Standing there, helpless, like a deer in headlights, the oil furnace kicked on. It had been a nice day, but the furnace still kicked on from time to time to keep the temperature where it was set. It didn't run for more than a minute before turning off. The oil tank sat beside the furnace. with both of them set a short space away from the wall. I dashed over behind the furnace and tried to stuff myself between it and the wall, making myself as small as possible in hopes that it might somehow not see me. It wasn't long before I heard the scrape of bone on the concrete floor, getting closer and closer. My life expectancy had shrunk to a matter of seconds. I wondered if anyone would ever know how I met my gruesome end, or would my story be a mystery, an urban legend like so many others that live near forested areas and suddenly disappear, never to be seen or heard from again. The sniffing was my death knell. It drew closer as the horns appeared in front of me. My only advantage was the horns couldn't fit between the oil tank and the furnace. I celebrated a small victory that this hellish monster would at least have to put forth some effort in order to get me. It struggled to reach behind the furnace, almost to me. The only thing that stopped it was leaning against the furnace and drawing back as it cried out in pain from the heat. Realizing my hiding space was compromised, I darted behind the oil tank, hoping the bulk of the tank would hinder it. I scooched as far as I could into the corner. There was only a small clearance between the tank and the wall, maybe a foot. I knew it couldn't get in here, but that didn't mean it couldn't reach me. Its arms were incredibly long. I watched as it seemed to be confused as to where I'd gone. The sniffing started again as it tried to locate me, but it seemed to be having problems. The fill pipe for the oil tank had a small leak. I'd wrapped rags around it, but there was still some oil in the rags. It seemed like the smell was throwing it off. For one brief moment, I saw it take a few steps away from me and my hiding place. It seemed like, by some miracle, I might be saved. It turned back toward the steps and seemed like it was leaving. I breathed a sigh of relief. Just then, it stopped, turned, and came straight toward the oil tank. It slammed its bulk against the tank, making the metal groan from the stress. It backed up and slammed into it again. This time I could see the metal bracket that was bolted into cement to keep the tank in place. It was starting to bend. I didn't think such a thing was possible, but after the third slam, the bolt broke. The tank teetered precariously toward the furnace. One more slam and the front bracket broke. The tank listed on its side, falling in slow motion toward the furnace. As the tank fell, the intake pipe broke loose. There was now an opening at the top of the tank that was slowly falling toward the furnace. Halfway down, heating oil began splashing out of the opening. The monster didn't seem to care. It had caught sight of me and was pushing the tank down to get to me. I had to stand or the tank would have crushed my leg. As soon as I did, it let out the most ungodly roar. If I hadn't soiled myself earlier, I would have just then. I was stuck. It was checkmate. I was trapped in a corner, with an oil tank and furnace blocking my way on one side, and a murderous, unholy abomination on the other. As the tank came to rest against the furnace, it ripped off the side, exposing part of the firebox. Somehow, I'd discovered another horrible way to die. The oil was dripping down the side of the furnace and into the firebox. The intermittent nature of the oil furnace had kept me safe for the moment, as it wasn't currently running. But it was only a matter of time. The oil dripping out of the tank was making an ever-expanding puddle on the floor. I tiptoed further into the corner to stay away from it, but the monster was climbing over the tank and was almost able to reach me. It didn't matter what I did. I was about to die. Its skeletal fingers brushed my shoulder, trying to get a grip. In sheer panic and desperation, I did the strangest thing I think I've ever done. I took the knife that I'd carried with me from the kitchen, shoved it through the arm bones of the monster, and then straight up with every ounce of strength, right into the ceiling. To my great joy, the knife buried itself in the space between the wooden boards and stuck. The monster squealed and pulled back on the offending appendage, causing more damage, but not breaking free. In my moment of triumph, the most unexpected and wonderful thing happened. The oil furnace kicked on. I watched in fascination as the oil that the monster was standing in ignited. The flames quickly engulfed it as it squealed in pain. I scrambled over the downed tank as the fire came towards me. Just before I hit the concrete floor, the monster reached out to grab me. My side was instantly on fire, and for the briefest of moments, I thought it had me. But instead, it tore a gash in my side. I didn't bother to look down at the damage, just ran up the stairs and out the door, not stopping until I was in the car and speeding down the road. When I finally got my breathing under control, I pondered where exactly I was going, aside from away from certain death. I reached down and touched my side, pulling away with a hand covered in blood. It seemed to me like my destination was indeed set. The hospital it was. Being 20 minutes away from the nearest town, I wondered if the monster had managed to kill me anyway. Bleeding to death would be better than being eaten, but I'd still be just as dead. Around 10 minutes into my trip, I saw flashing lights headed towards me and heard the siren of the fire truck as it sped past, heading uphill. I assumed they were going to extinguish my house and hoped that monster was already dead. The thought of it killing unsuspecting firemen almost made me turn around to go warn them. But I'd never catch up with them, and if I tried, it would possibly be the last thing I ever did. The thought of losing all the things I'd collected over the course of my life saddened me. But being alive to feel the sadness was its own reward. The worst part of knowing that I would never go near that house again was I'd miss my trees. Deep in the frozen wilderness, the legend of the Wendigo haunts those who dare to listen. From Algonquin folklore to real-life horror, this terrifying creature symbolizes greed, starvation, and the darkest depths of human nature. Tonight we dive into the origins of the Wendigo myth, true cases of Wendigo psychosis, and how this monstrous legend continues to terrify.
What you are about to hear is believed to be real, based on witness accounts, testimonies, and public record. This is terrifying and true.
As winter comes and the weather turns frigid, human imagination tends to wander to dark depths, where the trees whisper secrets and the wind howls like a starving beast. That's where a legend begins to lurk. It's older than the first snowfall, older than the bones buried beneath the ice. The Algonquin tribes spoke of it in hushed tones, a cursed creature with an insatiable hunger, a monster that was once a man. They say if you hear your name carried on the wind, it's already too late. Well, that's not a good sign. After this break, we're going to dive deep into the story of what happens when greed takes hold and hunger never ends. In the vast, snow-covered wilderness of North America, a dark and haunting legend took shape among the Algonquian-speaking peoples. The Wendigo, a creature born from greed and insatiable hunger, served as both a warning and a reflection of humanity's darkest impulses. With its emaciated frame and ravenous appetite, the Wendigo was said to consume not only flesh, but the very essence of balance and harmony, leaving destruction in its wake. But the Wendigo is more than just a monstrous figure of folklore. Over time, it is transformed into a powerful metaphor, representing individuals, ideology, and forces corrupted by unrestrained greed and selfishness. Its shadow looms large in stories of colonialism, environmental degradation, and even the exploitation of communities for personal gain. From traditional indigenous tales to modern interpretations in literature, film, and gaming, the Wendigo continues to captivate and terrify. Its symbolic resonance persists, a chilling reminder of what can happen when humanity's desires grow unchecked. The Wendigo's story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, asking the question, where does the line between survival and greed blur? And what happens when that line is crossed? The word Wendigo has its roots in Algonquin languages and translates to terms such as evil spirit or solely for self. This term is significant across several Native American languages, including Ojibwe, Cree, and Salto. The Wendigo is a supernatural being central to the spiritual traditions of Algonquin-speaking First Nations in North America. Described as a powerful and malevolent creature, the Wendigo is infamous for its unquenchable desire to kill and devour human beings. Legends suggest that humans can transform into Wendigos, typically due to greed, weakness, or moral corruption. This transformation underscores the cautionary aspect of the Wendigo as a symbol of what happens when individuals prioritize selfish desires over communal values. The Wendigo's existence within these stories highlights the dangers of greed and the devastating consequences it can bring to individuals and communities alike. It is a vivid metaphor for the destruction wrought by unrestrained human flaws. The Wendigo is universally regarded as a dangerous and sinister force within Algonquin cultures. Indigenous traditions describe it as not only a threat to individual lives, but also to the moral and spiritual health of entire communities. The creature is said to have a thirst for blood and an ability to corrupt those it encounters, spreading evil and destruction. Its presence serves as a potent warning about the consequences of isolation and the loss of humanity when greed and selfishness are allowed to take hold. Embedded within Wendigo legends is the theme of caution against isolation and the breakdown of community. These tales emphasize the importance of unity and collective well-being, warning against behaviors that disrupt social harmony. By embodying the extreme consequences of selfishness, the Wendigo reinforces the need for balance and mutual support. The Wendigo is a prominent figure in the belief systems of various Algonquin-speaking groups. While cultural nuances in the creature's description exist, there is a shared understanding of the Wendigo as a malevolent and cannibalistic supernatural being. This shared depiction reflects common values and moral principles across these diverse cultures, uniting them through the universal warnings embedded in the folklore. Often associated with harsh conditions, the Wendigo is closely tied to the north, winter, cold, famine, and starvation. These elements highlight the environmental challenges faced by the communities where the legend originated, adding another layer of meaning to the fable. The Wendigo becomes a symbol of desperation and survival in extreme circumstances, intertwining natural and supernatural elements to create a powerful narrative. Basil H. Johnson, an Ojibwe teacher and scholar from Ontario, Canada, vividly described the Wendigo. According to Johnson, the creature's appearance reflects its monstrous nature. It is gaunt and emaciated, with ash-gray skin stretched tightly over its bones and deeply sunken eyes. Despite its skeletal and starvation-like form, the Wendigo possesses an unrelenting appetite. Every time it consumes a victim, it grows larger in size, ensuring its hunger is never satisfied. This haunting combination of insatiable hunger and perpetual thinness illustrates the destructive nature of greed and excess. In various native accounts, Wendigos are often depicted as giants, vastly larger than human beings. These legends emphasize the creature's terrifying scale, which grows in proportion to the people it devours. This trait, unique to certain Algonquin traditions, symbolizes the endless cycle of greed. The more it consumes, the greater its need for sustenance. The Wendigo is a relentless predator, forever seeking new victims and embodying an eternal state of gluttony and starvation. The Wendigo's connection to greed extends beyond its physical form. It is a creature that communicates and, in some depictions, retains human-like cognition and speech. This ability allows it to taunt or threaten its victims, adding an eerie psychological element to its predatory nature. These stories, rooted in Algonquin oral history, predate European colonization and reveal the depth of belief in supernatural beings among indigenous cultures. The first written account of the Wendigo by a European came from Jesuit missionary Jean Lejeune in 1636 in what is now Quebec. In his report, Lejeune described tales of a Wendigo that had killed and eaten several people and was believed to have plans to devour many more. Lejeune's account highlights the shared belief in supernatural spirits between 17th century Europeans and First Nations peoples. Interestingly, his report, written decades before the Salem witch trials, underscores how deeply embedded these beliefs were in both cultures at the time. Missionaries in Canada continued to document Wendigo legends well into the 20th century, demonstrating the enduring presence of these tales within indigenous and colonial narratives. The Wendigo legend remained a focal point for discussions of morality, spirituality, and survival across centuries. In the 19th century, tales of the Wendigo spread to the western frontier, where Plains indigenous peoples and Hudson's Bay Company employees encountered the legend. HBC records recount indigenous spiritual leaders who fell into states of intense religious fervor, leading to accusations of being Wendigos. Community members often reacted with fear and, in extreme cases, took drastic measures. Suspected Wendigos were sometimes killed as a precaution, reflecting the seriousness with which these beliefs were held. One notable example involved the Cree spiritual leader Abishabis, who was killed by 3 men after he became greedy and murdered an indigenous family. This act led his community to believe he had transformed into a Wendigo. Such stories highlight the intersection of spiritual beliefs and real-life consequences, demonstrating the profound influence of the Wendigo legend in shaping cultural practices and community dynamics. One of the most haunting tales of the Wendigo, documented by Lottie Chicagua Marsden, an ethnographer of the Chippewas of Rama First Nation, tells of a young boy abducted by this fearsome creature. The Wendigo, driven by its insatiable hunger, planned to fatten the boy up before devouring him. Using a knife, the Wendigo cruelly cut the boy's hand to test if he had gained enough fat, but constant travel kept the boy thin. When they stumbled upon a nearby village, the boy seized his chance to warn the locals about the monster lurking in the woods. The villagers, guided by the boy's courage, confronted the Wendigo, cutting off its legs. However, the creature's horrifying resilience was revealed as it began consuming the marrow from its own severed limbs in order to sustain itself. The villagers returned and ultimately destroyed the Wendigo, ending its terror, but leaving behind a tale of morbid endurance and a truly unyielding hunger. Some Algonquin traditions claim that a person consumed by greed or who resorts to cannibalism transforms into a Wendigo, while others suggest that mere prolonged exposure to a Wendigo's influence can cause the same horrific fate. These stories go beyond supernatural folklore. They serve as moral lessons, emphasizing the importance of balance, community, and resisting the darker impulses of humanity, especially in times of hardship. Rituals and ceremonies played a significant role in addressing the fear of the Wendigo among certain indigenous communities. For the Assiniboine, Cree, and Ojibwe peoples, the Wendigo Kanzimhoan, a ceremonial dance performed during times of famine, was a striking display of cultural resilience. Dancers would don masks and move backward around a drum, creating an eerie yet symbolic representation of the Wendigo's taboo. These performances served as both a reminder and a communal reinforcement of survival strategies during dire circumstances. The last recorded ceremony took place at Lake Wendigo on Star Island, within Minnesota's Leech Lake Indian Reservation, representing the enduring presence of this myth in Algonquin culture. The phenomenon of Wendigo psychosis bridges the realm of folklore and historical accounts. Allegedly, during extreme starvation, individuals could succumb to a condition that drove them to crave human flesh. A famous Jesuit account from the 17th century describes individuals overtaken by this ravenous hunger, attacking and consuming others in their community. The only solution, as understood by those witnessing such events, was often execution to stop the spreading of madness. Cree traditions, however, recount efforts to treat the condition, involving rituals using fatty animal meats and a symbolic purging process where afflicted individuals would expel ice, believed to signify the Wendigo's icy grip, leaving their bodies. One of the most infamous true cases tied to Wendigo psychosis is that of Swift Runner, a Cree trapper in Alberta during the winter of 1878. As his family faced starvation, Swift Runner's eldest son died. Rather than seeking help from a food supply post just 25 miles away, he succumbed to cannibalism, killing and consuming his wife and remaining children. Authorities determined this was not mere survival cannibalism, but evidence of a man consumed by Wendigo psychosis. Swift Runner confessed to his crimes and was executed at Fort Saskatchewan. His story remains one of the most harrowing intersections of myth and documented history. The concept of Wendigo psychosis has sparked heated debates among scholars and researchers. Some view it as a product of cultural misunderstanding by early anthropologists, while others argue it reflects genuine historical events shaped by extreme conditions. Today, the International Statistical Classification of Diseases, or ICD, recognizes Wendigo as a culture-specific syndrome, describing it as a rare obsession with cannibalism marked by delusions and uncontrollable hunger. Modern studies suggest it could be linked to starvation-induced mental disorders, nutrient deficiencies, or social isolation. Ojibwe scholar Brady DeSanti suggests the Wendigo represents a person disconnected from harmony, causing harm to their environment and relationships. Louise Erdrich's novel The Roundhouse exemplifies this concept, depicting a rapist whose actions endanger his community as a Wendigo-like figure who must be stopped. This concept extends to movements as well as ideologies. Professor Chris Schiedler compares the Wendigo to colonialism, emphasizing how expansionism devastated indigenous lands and disrupted natural balance. The 1999 film Ravenous illustrates this, linking the Wendigo to Manifest Destiny, where unmitigated hunger for land and resources led to widespread destruction. In this context, the Wendigo becomes a symbol for forces that exploit and harm others under the guise of progress. The metaphor also applies universally, addressing broader patterns of greed and exploitation. Joe Lockhart, an English professor, describes the Wendigo as a manifestation of social cannibalism, where self-interest overrides communal values. Romantic scholar Emily Zarka ties the Wendigo to winter, hunger, and selfishness, themes central to survival in harsh climates. The creature embodies the consequences of succumbing to selfish instincts, reflecting the struggles of maintaining balance in adversity. In popular culture, the Wendigo has been reshaped, often losing its cultural context. Algernon Blackwood's 1910 novella, The Wendigo, introduced it to Western audiences but altered its meaning, portraying it through colonial stereotypes. Subsequent works like Stephen King's Pet Sematary and August Derleth's Ithequah further disconnected it from indigenous roots, focusing on horror over tradition. In recent years, indigenous creators have reclaimed the Wendigo's narrative, using it to address themes of colonialism, greed, and identity. Works like Linda Hogan's Solar Storms and Nathan Adler's Wrist integrate the legend into critiques of exploitation and loss. In media like Antlers and Fallout 76, the Wendigo appears as a monstrous antagonist, often divorced from its deeper meaning. Despite this evolution, the Wendigo remains a powerful symbol, reminding us of the consequences of our actions, even when we're desperate. The legend of the Wendigo leaves behind a haunting legacy of fear and introspection. While its roots lie in indigenous folklore, the Wendigo has grown to symbolize so much more. Its haunting presence has transcended its mythical origins, becoming a metaphor for all of the darkest aspects of human nature and societal exploitation. The Wendigo serves as a stark reminder of the cost of consuming more than we need and disrupting the harmony of the world around us. The enduring fascination with the Wendigo in popular culture reflects our collective struggle to understand and confront these darker impulses. But even as the creature continues to terrify and intrigue, it forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. What happens when greed consumes us? How far can we push the boundaries before the balance is broken forever? The story of the Wendigo remains a powerful warning, a symbol of the monsters that can emerge not only in the shadows of legend, but from within ourselves. And that's the storm, my spookies. 4 trips into the cold, and every one of them left tracks you're not going to like finding later. But here's the thing about winter horror. Sometimes the monster is claws and teeth in the tree line, and sometimes it's the part that feels real. The hunger, the greed, the terrible decisions people make when the world turns white and silent. That's why we closed this best of 2025 with an episode of Terrifying and True, to make sure you understand the reality behind the hungry shape wandering in the winds. If you managed to survive the cold and are still with us, well, make sure you're subscribed. But first, lock the door, check the porch light, and let me know which story hit you the hardest. Until next time, stay warm, stay safe, and stay spooky, of course.